let's see. So Psalm 52 and a lament. And this time, this lament has a long superscription. So here you have a psalm that really is being pinned to a very particular time and place in the narrative of David, to the lead. That's dark, and so it's the story of when David goes to he's fleeing from Saul, and he goes to where the shrine of the Ark of the Tabernacle of the Ark of the Covenant is, and he goes, and he and his men are famished, they're hungry, and they're fainting from hunger, and so he asks the priest to give him the bread of the presence. And so Jesus actually in Mark's gospel references that part of this story where did not David, when they say, why are you allowing your disciples to eat on the, to do work on the Sabbath by plucking the heads of grain? Jesus says, did not David and his men eat the bread of the presence, right, in the tabernacle? So David goes and he finds shelter from Ahimelech, and so then he goes off and then he escapes. So now David does this, and then the story says, now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. So that it just gives you that little sentence in a story, and then it has David, and then Ahimelech. David doesn't have a even weapon with him, and so Ahimelech says, or David says, do you have any weapons around the place? And Ahimelech says, basically the only thing we have is Goliath's sword. And David says, that's a good one, give it to me. So he takes Goliath's sword from him. They had placed the sword in the shrine of the ark, and so he gives him the sword, and David goes off and escapes. So David left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And so cave of Adullam kind of becomes his bandit, kind of Jesse James's hideout out there in the wilderness of Judea. So then Saul, and so picking up with 1 Samuel chapter 22, Saul heard that David and those who were with him had been located. Saul was sitting under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. Saul said to those around him, hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why all of you have conspired against? No one discloses to me when my son makes a league with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me, or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as he is doing today. Doeg the Edomite, who was in charge of Saul's servants, answered, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub. He inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So you notice in the story, none of the Benjamites, that is, none of the Israelites, will actually inform on David to Saul. But Doeg, who is the Gentile, the Edomite, kind of a foreign employee, is happy to spill the beans to Saul. The king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and for all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. Saul said, listen now, son of Ahitub. He answered, here I am, my lord. Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword, and by inquiring of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as he is doing today? Then Ahimelech answered the king, who among all your servants is so faithful as David? He is the king's son-in-law and is quick to do your bidding and is honored in your house. Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? By no means. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any member of my father's house, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. So it's a very reasonable answer that that Ahimelech gives to Saul. Basically, hey, isn't he your son-in-law? Isn't he like an important person? How am I supposed to know he's on the outs of you? So the king said, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. The king said to the guard who stood around him, Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. They knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not raise their hand to attack the priests of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, You, Doeg, turn and attack the priests. Doeg the Edomite turned and attacked the priests. On that day he killed 85 who wore the linen ephod. Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword. Men and women, children and infants, oxen, donkeys, and sheep he put to the sword. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I am responsible for the lives of all your father's house. Stay with me and do not be afraid, for the one who seeks my life seeks your life. You will be safe with me. Okay, so there's the referent. There's the narrative context of this psalm. So then, in the Psalter, this psalm is supposed to be composed by David after Abiathar has told him that Doeg had slain all the priests. So that's in the background of what we hear. So in verses 1 through 4, we have some work being done in that psalm by those verses. What would that section? What kind of a function does that section serve?
Is it an accusation or judgment?
Right. Okay. So good. So you have a complaint directed against the enemy, right? So you have this. Why do you boast, Almighty One? It's like, why is God letting this nasty person, this mighty one, and then the mighty one? It's like, well, who's the mighty? Well, it's Doeg, right? So it could be either Doeg or Saul. But kind of David is complaining, well, Doeg, that he turned me in. It's like, that's my bad. So the mighty one, Doeg, and the mischief done against the godly, right, against the priests of the Lord. All day long you're plotting destruction. Your tongue is like a sharp razor, you worker of treachery. You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking the truth. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. So I think actually that the referent there is Doeg, right? So David is complaining against Doeg, who kind of has turned Saul on to David. But this is interesting. So a complaint is normally addressed to God. But look what happens here. To whom is this complaint addressed?
To the mighty one.
Yeah, to the malefactor, to the mighty one, the doer of evil deeds. So instead of complaining to God, is kind of an apostrophe, kind of a speaking out loud, to someone who's not there. And so it's interesting. So this is, instead of usually in a lament, the complaint is directed to God. And here the complaint is directed against the evildoer himself. And so it does bear resemblance to kind of a legal accusation. And essentially in other laments, the person doing the lamenting is accusing God, really. I mean, that's what a complaint is. It's like, God, you're not doing your job. Why are you letting these bad things happen? But here the accusation is directed immediately to the evil one.
Is the evil one, is he referring to Doeg as the evil one?
Right. Yes, he's the mighty one, the one whose tongue is like a sharp razor, who loves evil more than good. Right. So again, in the context of the narrative, in a sense, by setting it within the context of the narrative, is we see that it's somebody who is allied against you know, number one, against the priesthood, and kind of the priesthood has the symbol of the godly in the land, right? And so, you know, the priest would have been defenseless. It's really kind of it's really a slaughter of the defenseless priest by Doeg. In a sense, the wickedness of the enemy, or of Doeg, you know, part of the complaint is that, or the kind of the way that the wicked, that his wicked behavior is functioning, is that since Doeg's loyalty is to, in a sense, his own pocket or his own power, his own influence, instead of to God. That in a sense, if Doeg had loyalty to God, he would have kept mum, like all the Benjamites, right? The Benjamites aren't turning David in. Nobody's cooperating with Saul in his vengeful pursuit of David, but you have the Gentile, right? The pagan Gentile who is willing to kind of seek his own advantage by persecuting the godly, vulnerable. Again, as the Psalms would say, the poor, right? That's the poor, you know, the quintessentially vulnerable against the power of the against the vulnerable against those in power. So by setting this in this canonical context, or it's a narrative context, in a sense, it invites the reader, in a sense, the one who would say this psalm is basically likening whoever is troubling them, right? Whoever is oppressing them, to Doeg, right? So basically, I've got someone in my life that is treating me like Doeg, the Edomite. You know, so it's kind of, Doeg stands as symbol, indicating that in the narrative, Doeg stands as a symbol of the kind of the unrighteous one who is willing to do bad deeds to get ahead, right? To get his own advantage. You know, kind of for you guys, what, you know, and as we read this part of the psalm, verses 1 through 4, what in there kind of jumps out at you is particularly a particularly powerful or apt expression of the psalmist? Or I guess another way to answer, oh, go ahead, Jenny.
And for you love all words that devour. And then, oh, deceitful tongue, just, you know, that I kind of have this vision of like a monster, and how, well, and also, you know, and Satan too, how when everything, it just kind of, it can envelop and just completely destroy if it's
right. Isn't it, you know, and yes, we, you know, have we had experiences of those who utter words that devour, that they can, through gossip, through criticism, through slander, they can devour reputations, they can devour happiness, they can devour the teamwork of a group, right? In a sense, and that's, so yeah, I agree, Jay. I think that's in a sense, a very evocative description of one who uses the gift of speech as curse rather than blessing. You know, if you think about the powerful gift of speech itself, and that we're called to be stewards of our speech. And the Epistle to James has a section about this. You know, how the tongue is a flame. You know, and it can, you know, a mighty ship can be steered by a small little rudder, and so is the tongue. And so the Epistle of James has about a chapter on the misuse of human speech. And so here again, we have someone who is able to use their words in ways that are profoundly hurtful, especially to the vulnerable. Right. And it says, how can this, if you were to say this about, can you pray this, or what would be, let me ask the question, what would be a context in which you could pray these verses? Or let me ask it this way. If you were if you were introspective, as one occasionally does in prayer, one hopes, is one is introspecting and examining one's own heart and conscience, how could you pray these words to yourself? Yeah, Elizabeth, you're on mute. There you go.
That you're not speaking in that way, that you are not
Okay.
like going to people and just like in my line of work, chastising in a way that would be that hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So it says, how have I used my tongue as a razor?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, Augustine, Augustine has a kind of interesting, he goes off about the razor and how it shaves, and how, those who have their mind on heavenly things don't mind a shave, because, it says they can get a shave of their possessions because their mind is in heaven. And just like you don't feel the hairs of your head being cut, it's like, someone whose mind is in heaven, it's like someone can take your stuff and you just don't even feel it. It's like the hairs of your head, and so how the godly are impervious to the razor of the, of the wicked, of their wicked speech. But it is, he just has some interesting likes on things. But it's like good old Augustine. He can make a sermon out of you not being able to feel your hairs being cut off your head. But he finds that to be illuminating. But to each his own. But in a sense, I wonder if also that we can, as we examine ourselves, if this might also be a word that we can say to the tempter in us, that the mighty one in our spiritual wrestling with temptation is the one who in a sense tells us in our own hearts, who whispers a lie about us, right? That we're not worthy of love, that that we don't deserve forgiveness, that after all we're all alone in this life, and it's you should look out for number one, that in a sense whatever that voice or heart is, that in a sense that loves to like a sharp razor that cuts you to the quick, and causes you to kind of have internal spiritual bleeding, that is a worker of treachery, that encourages you to betray loyalty to the gospel, your loyalty to the way of Jesus, and the one that loves the voice in you that loves that devour your joy, that devour your hope. And so some way in that this prayer, this part of the song can be prayed against the mighty one, the one who does mischief, against the godly, against that part of us which seeks to follow Jesus, that has been redeemed, and we can pray this against that voice in us. Why do you boast? Don't. It's like get back. Talk to the hand. Get behind me, Satan. So we move on from the complaint against either internal or external enemies, or our internal temptations or doubts or fears, into verses 5 through 7. So how would you characterize kind of this section? What is in the lament and the kind of the parts of a lament? What is the work that gets done here?
So this is God as rescuer and your statement of faith?
Right, so good. So yeah, the confession of faith. But again, like the accusation or the complaint, the confession of faith is not addressed to God. So remember, in the laments, typically you have a complaint directed against God, and then a confession of faith to God, and a confession of faith in God. But here, just as the accusation or the complaint is leveled in a sense directly against the wicked in absentia, so the confession of faith is fascinatingly directed against the wicked. It says, but God will break you. There's that second person, right? That use of the second person. God will break you down. So it's a confession of what God is going to do to the wicked, to one's enemy. It's not addressed to God. God's going to break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. And again, in the narrative context, of course, we have is Doeg and the slaughter of the priests of Nob, right? And the city of Nob. So, kind of, dragging the women and children out of the houses of Nob and slaughtering them in the streets. And in some ways, the story is, the story of Saul ordering the destruction and the slaughter of Nob is an Old Testament precursor or sign or type of the slaughter of the holy innocents in Bethlehem. And so again, you have a false king, Herod, directing the slaughter of those in the house, from the house of David. He's going after David, right? And so Herod is going after the son of David, who's born in David's city, and directs the slaughter of innocents. And so Saul's slaughter of the Benjamites is, again, a type, or forms kind of an Old Testament preview, if you will, of the slaughter of the holy innocents. The righteous will see and fear, and will laugh at the evildoer, saying, see, the one who would not take refuge in God, but trusted in abundant riches and sought refuge in wealth. So again, in the context, that's Doeg thinking that he's going to get a payday. But again, Doeg can stand as a symbol for the one who is willing to do dirty deeds, or, in the venerable words of the rock group AC/DC, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. So the Doeg is the doer of dirty deeds done dirt cheap. So if we take this into this section into the New Testament as well, what would be another context that would lend itself to kind of a New Testament setting for these words?
Okay. In verse 7, this would kind of be, I'm reading it kind of as a direct argument against what the people that were mocking Jesus, who were saying, see, when they were saying, see, even his own God, why does he not, rescue himself? Trusted, see the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction. So kind of this kind of refutes, it goes against, I just lost it.
Well, I see what you're saying, that basically you see this in a sense that you could see the crowds thinking that they're fulfilling this in their mockery of Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. And right, in the Passion, right? But think about the Passion narrative. Who is one who, instead of taking refuge in God, trusted in abundant riches? Judas, yes, ding, ding, ding. Yes. So in the kind of the Christological appropriation of, remember, David, son of David, and that again you have the false king using. So remember, Saul uses a Gentile man of arms to kill the innocent, and so then Herod and the priesthood of the temple use the Gentile Romans as their instrument of destroying the innocent, the righteous Jesus. And so, in a sense, this this psalm is something that was applied in a sense. It was, we can see Jesus in a sense from Jesus's perspective, that the righteous will be, and fear, which is again, fear in the Old Testament is the name for worship, for basically the awareness that, I say fear in the Old Testament is the awareness that God is very, very big and we're very, very small. So that's what fear is. It's like if you come up against, the way I liken it is, if you've ever been to Niagara Falls or to like a really rushing river and you get up to the edge and you see all that water, if you're at the top of the falls and you see that water and you can hear the and you just, it's almost dizzying, it almost makes you dizzy to see that much water, running. And it's like, if you're smart, it's like you have this instinct to back away from the edge, right? Fear, right? In a sense, for the Israelites, the Israelite notion of the fear of the Lord, right, is that sense of, I'm up against like the power of a rushing river. Another psalm will say, like the water courses of the Negev, right? Like the Negev was the desert. And so basically in the desert, you have flash floods. And so it's like God is going to show up like a flash flood, right? That just, wipes out everything in his path. And so the fear of the Lord is something that acknowledges that God's power is really, really big, and it's best kind of observed from a distance. So that's the Old Testament notion of fear of the Lord. But the one who sees and fears will laugh at the evildoer. Basically, yeah, you're going over the side in a barrel. You laugh at the wicked. See the one who would not take refuge in God, but trusted in abundant riches and sought refuge and wealth. And in a sense, that's one of, in a sense, Luke, especially the Gospel of Luke, brings this forward. Luke wants to highlight the kind of the craven greed of the temple aristocracy. The story of the widow's mite, that Luke really brings forward the kind of the Luke has the parables about you cannot have a loyalty to, you cannot love God and love mammon at the same time. You can't have two masters. So that's part of the story that we have in the Passion. So now in verses 8 and 9, we have a shift. So there's a definitive shift now as we conclude the psalm. And so how would you describe that shift?
Kind of like a praise, a hope.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so there's praise. And so it shifts from, you're going to get yours to simply God is great. And in a sense, I'm doing fine, because God is with me. So I'm like a green olive tree, right? So you have here evoked in this part of the psalm, you have Psalm 1 evoked, that the righteous are like a tree that grows by the side of a flowing stream, whose branches shall not wither, that shall bear fruit in due season, etc. Right? And so now you have, in a sense, the praise is, especially in verse 9, is now the psalmist is speaking to God. Right? So I will thank you forever. And so now the you is no longer just the Lord. So now confession and praise are addressed to God. And in a sense, again, we have this familiar feature of the Psalms and the deliverance, the Song of Psalms, in a sense, the deliverance that is in a sense spoken of has something that has already happened. I will thank you forever because of what you have done. Right? So in a sense, the deliverance from, and so in the original narrative, it would be David's ultimate deliverance from Saul. Right? That the Lord delivers David from not only Doeg, but from Saul himself. For Jesus, what would that be? Christologically, so on the lips of Jesus, what would that be? What would that be? Yeah, so if David is delivered from Saul, from whom is Jesus delivered?
Satan.
Death.
Right, good. Satan and death itself, death with a capital D, right? So, so Jesus is delivered from death, right? I will thank you forever because what you have done. And so again, the Psalms can be heard as, when we place the Psalms on the lips of Jesus, that in a sense, Jesus sings the praise of his Father at the Father's right hand. I will thank you forever because of what you have done. In the presence of the faithful, I will proclaim your name, for it is good. So Jesus as the one who preeminently is the praiser of his Father, and especially death, delivered from death at the hands of the false leaders of his people, right? I.e., Herod and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin. So then has the Christians saying these words kind of come up in your heart, your mind as you read verses 8 and 9.
There's no power greater than God's.
Mm-hmm. Right, good. What else? Who else?
God's got me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's that steadfast love, or hesed, again. And, that he's like a green olive tree in the house of God. So, again, now that in a sense now as Christians, the house of God is God's own temple or dwelling within our own human heart. That in a sense our hope and our love and our faith all can kind of grow and bear fruit in the heart that's rooted in God. And that we proclaim God's, in the presence of the faithful, we proclaim God's name and his goodness. All right. So kind of this, so it's a different sort of song, so again, so many of the laments have a kind of a hypothetical wicked person that you're talking about, or kind of a, archetypal wicked person. But here, this is different in the sense that it really does root this particular psalm in the narrative historical experience of David.
And
Randy.
so who was the accusation or criticism leveled against? Saul or the man that did it, or both?
I think probably Doeg, the Edomite, is probably the one against who provoked it, be given simply the superscription of, when Doeg the Edomite came to Saul.
Yeah.
And of course, this is, David only knew about that because Abiathar fled, right, and could tell him about it. But I think it's more about Doeg's. And since remember that Doeg sees him in the house of the Lord, that Doeg, in a sense, is exile, but he does seem to be, he was detained before the Lord. So in a sense, he seems to have been somebody who was worshiping at the shrine of Yahweh. And so kind of David is, part of his beef, if you will, is that should have been sacred ground. That should have been, we were in Switzerland when you saw me. You shouldn't have been blabbing to Saul about where you saw me. Yeah.
Because it's Saul, it is not, they saw David and his men there, right?
Right. Well, Doeg saw David and his men, and so Saul basically goes to Ahimelech's hometown. And so basically the way that this worked is that you had, you had a rotation of priestly families that would work at the shrine. And so, you know, you'd have kind of the clans would take their turn at the shrine. We see that also, for example, in Luke's gospel, where Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, has his turn.
Yeah, and it goes deaf, yeah.
Right, and so basically when Saul wants to go, he's like, all right, let's go find this Ahimelech guy. And so he goes, instead of chasing David into the wilderness, he goes to Nob, to where Ahimelech and his father's house, basically his extended family, his clan, and he goes to Ahimelech's village of Nob and then slaughters the village because he can't get his hands on David, so he'll go for Ahimelech, which is kind of the next thing as far as Saul is concerned.
Wasn't it because he gave aid to David, right?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Okay.
Yeah. That's why kind of David acknowledges in that story. He says basically to Abiathar, "Hey, this is on me. You know, he was the patriarch of your clan was helping me out, so I'm going to take responsibility for you." And actually, Abiathar becomes basically the chaplain, David's kind of rebel movement, and goes on to play a key role throughout David's life in the narrative. So I think Abiathar is the one who manages to, when Absalom rebels, I think Abiathar is the one who stays behind and kind of gives bad counsel to Absalom to cause him to lose. So good old Abiathar, he stays loyal to David and David's loyal to him. All right, Psalm 53. This might be familiar to you because it's almost identical with Psalm 14.
Yep.
There's just a very minor difference around verse 5. There's some slight difference. There's a difference in wording, but Psalm 14 says the same thing. But you may have slept since then, and so as we come back round on these words, so fools say in their heart, there is no God. And I guess I just to go at this psalm a different way would be to simply ask, so what causes us to be foolish? What causes us to be foolish? If fools say in their heart there is no God, what causes us to? I'm sorry?
Ignorance.
Okay, being ignorant, right? Okay.
It would be like a
What
moral
else?
deficiency.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it just
So right. Yeah, Randy, yeah.
Well, I read the deal about how he came to be Esau's wife. So he did it just to spite God, right? Esau, is that not right?
I'm trying to get the story you're referencing. Esau?
According to this, and I don't have it marked anymore. Apparently, God said, "Don't take any Canaanite women as your wives." And then when Jacob got one, Esau went and got one. Isn't that part of that 53? Are we not to 53?
I don't know. I'm not. I don't.
If you don't know, it's clearly not right. So.
Well, I don't know. I just it's just kind of it's attributed to David.
Mhm.
So it's kind of addressed in a kind of it's a complaint against a kind of the kind of general unrighteousness and cynicism of the age in which the psalmist lives. So this should be an age that is recognizable to us. So where the fools say in their heart there is no God, right? So kind of living godless lives. Now, unlike modern America in 2021, formal atheism was truly impossible to conceive in ancient Israel, really until the modern period. Like a genuinely like there is actually being know, that there was something, you know, even the Greek philosophers, prime, so even the kind of, there's no such thing as, now Greek philosophy and all that stuff, they thought, oh, well, that's just superstition. But even the Greek philosophers thought that there was a creator. There was something, you know, that there's something out there. They could disagree about whether the creator cared about the creation, or if there was kind of some sort of forces that were moving through the, you know, through the material world. But to have a world that was completely devoid of the divine would not have been anywhere in anybody's ability to see. So to say that there is no God in the psalmist context is not about atheism as we know it. It's more about a life lived completely disregarding God's commandments and the requirements of justice and social well-being. Right? That's to live a godless life, is to live a life not where you're part of the American Atheist Society, but rather, you know, or the society. What's those commercials they have on CNN from time to time? Is Ronald Reagan's son, isn't it? That's like the Society of American Atheists, whatever it is. But that's not what it means. It's about basically acting like there's nobody, you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, oppressing the poor or doing horrible things, because they're, you know, that God just doesn't care. So they're corrupt. They commit abominable acts. There is no one who does good. And so that this is the quintessence of foolishness. God looks down from heaven on humankind to see if there are any who are wise, who seek after God. They have all fallen away. They are all alike. There is no one who does good. No, not one. So in a sense, how does the kind of in a sense, this is a testimony to the kind of the social nature of evil, right? That in a sense, evil has a social dimension to it. You know, I dare not say systemic, but that there's at the very least a social dimension to evil itself. That in a sense, if you're trying to live as a good person amongst a society where God looks down and, you know, basically if everybody else is perverse and fallen away, it's going to be very difficult for even the righteous person to kind of keep their head on straight, right? It's going to be very difficult to find your way towards doing God's will if you live in a culture that which is structurally very difficult to do so. And so that's kind of the psalmist's complaint here, is that basically it's you know, that I live in the midst of a wicked people that make it very difficult for me to do what I know God wants me to do. Then having no knowledge, those evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God. It's interesting. I think this is kind of ambiguous. It seems like it is. I'm not sure if the psalmist is saying this or if God is saying this. What do you guys think? Who eat up my people and then do not call upon, I guess, call upon me. Erica?
Could this be talking about the covenant, like from God's perspective? His people are still keeping covenant?
Right, sure. Yeah, so that's the kind of on the God is speaker side. Again, you could have, you know, again, if this is a maskell of David, you know, you could also imagine David as the king saying, you know, they eat up my people. Like, you know, and you know, that David has the kind of the man whose heart, you know, the God is, you know, a man after God's own heart, saying, you know, boy, you're going to be a good king, and it's really tough, you know, especially when you have Bathsheba bathing down there in full view. It's like, how am I supposed to be a good king when you got these women bathing on their rooftops? Right.
Could
Yes.
it also be like the psalmist, the person who's writing the psalm, saying it as my people, as in my community?
Yes, absolutely. That's Very fair construction of that. But it's ambiguous, right? But that's fine. So this all, you know, you can play it a couple different ways, and that's the beauty of poetry, is that you can, you know, you can kind of roll it around in your prayers. You know, again, if you're saying a daily psalter, you know, you'll come up against it about every 30 days. So you can kind of try it every which way. Now, here's the part that's different from Psalm 14. For they shall be in great terror, in terror such as has not been. For God will scatter the bones of the ungodly. They will be put to shame, for God has rejected them. So this is, in a sense, now is kind of like is much more of an imprecation, a psalm of, you know, a psalm of imprecation against the fools and the ungodly. You'll scatter their bones, which is, you know, the again, if you have kind of a you know, that's again for ancient man, you know, I hesitate to mention this because people you know, someone on this Zoom call might have had this practice done for a family member, but you know, like in the modern world where people are spreading their ashes every which where, you know, it's like, oh, I want half my ashes here and half my ashes there and a third of my ashes there and a fifth of my ashes there. You know, we just don't get the ancient revulsion against not having all your remains in one spot. They're just like to have your bones scattered, to have, you know, in a sense, to have not all of you all in one spot. It was seen by the ancient world, even really up until very, as being like the ultimate indignity. The worst fate is like a fate worse than death, worse than dying the first time, is to have your bones scattered. You know, that would just be horrible. Yeah. So the idea of grave desecration. You know, it's hard to understand how a modern would go about doing that. I don't know. I just find the modern perspective interesting. It's like, you know, if you're a modern and you really don't believe in any of this, how would you actually desecrate if you don't believe in the sacred? Can you actually desecrate anything? You know, it's like if it's all just dirt, then, you know, it is what it is. So I know it's just, and yet I think that there's still some sort of this instinctual idea that one ought not to do that sort of thing. Erica.
So I have kind of.
I thought you were raising your hand.
I was. Oh. I have kind of a two-part question for you. So in Psalm 14, it says, because in the company of the righteous, which is to me a really different, that second half of that verse. But the question is,
yes,
this psalm, can you tell us the background about why this psalm in almost identicalness would have appeared twice? Is this a scribe thing in a different scroll and it was, you know, put together? Or was this idea so important they meant to repeat it?
Well, I think it's probably both. I think that that this idea is an important idea for the psalmist and for the faith of Israel, but also it's one of the key differences is that the name of God is changed between verse 14 or Psalm 14 to Psalm 53. In Psalm 14, it's Yahweh. It's the tetragrammaton is used.
Right, and it's
right. The Lord has rejected them.
Right.
Right, and so this is Elohim. So the word that's translated God here is Elohim. So this is coming from a different stream of Israelite spirituality, and the J source, or the Yahweh source, and kind of the Yahwistic stream, and the E source, or the Elohim source. And so basically we scholars think that the Yahweh tradition was a southern tradition, that is kind of Judah, Benjamin, kind of the southern kingdom. And the Elohim traditions, the addressing God as Elohim, was a northern tradition, because the E tradition is definitely the junior partner in the scriptures. But what you have in a sense is the psalm, kind of the same psalm, but using the Elohim. And so that tradition, in a sense, gets represented by repeating the psalm and putting it in the mouth of David, right? So it's kind of David said Elohim as well as Yahweh. He was ecumenical that way. But other than that, it's really a mystery. It's just kind of, it's there, it's repeated, and we're not exactly sure why, other than those sort of speculations. Jenny?
So at the beginning of 5 and 5a, it says, there they are in great terror where there is no terror. Is that meaning they're in terror, but they don't know it yet? They haven't figured it out? Kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, again, this also is an indication of how difficult the poetry is to translate, because the NRSV, it's there they shall be in great terror, in terror such as has not been. That is, in a sense, it's like so horrible that no one has ever seen the kind of terror they're going to be in. So it is, in a sense, there is the kind of the common notion of they will be terrorized, but there's kind of some difficulty in exactly figuring out what the Hebrew means. Yeah, so you have some different approximations. But we go on to verse 6. Oh, that deliverance for Israel would come from Zion. When God restores the forces of his people, Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad. Well, that's a giveaway to the northern kingdom right there. So, Jacob is a northern tribal name, and Israel are the northern tribes. So again, that just kind of binds it to the Elohim tradition. But for the name of God's people. Yes, Charmaine.
Go back to Erica's question. So if you have something that is common to both northern and southern kingdom, if that were in the New Testament and the Gospels, you would say that might be belonging to an older version that they both shared from.
Precisely. Yes. Exactly. That's the great observation.
So there is an older version somewhere around we don't know about.
I mean, there might have been an oral. I mean, in a sense, this is kind of the oral tradition, right? So, the Psalms themselves are some of these Psalms. And if they pinned them to David, that typically speaking is something that's telling us that it was venerable enough. They thought, oh, it must have come from David because none of us can remember who wrote it. Whereas further on in the Psalter, you're going to get Psalms attributed to Asaph and other people. So to attribute it to David, the original psalm writer, is a way of saying this is really old. This is something that's way back there in our tradition. And so it is very well could be something that would have lived before in the memory and the songs of Israel before the split of the two kingdoms. And so then when they kind of in the exile, when they kind of brought, when both northern and southerners wound up in exile together, and they kind of synthesized traditions, like, okay, well, we're going to have our psalm and we'll put your psalm in there too. Yeah.
The last though, NRSV note says it's most likely a post-exile edition, so it wasn't there before, and yet it appears in both.
Right.
Add-on.
Yeah. So like this, often we'll see, like in the Psalms, we'll see the coda. This coda, and it's kind of like a later editor would say, we can't end it this way, because basically if you don't have that coda, what it ends with is, God will scatter the bones of the ungodly; they will be put to shame, for God has rejected them. Amen. It's like, oh, come on, it's like, so a post-exilic editor, you can see, I was like, well, we need to put something on this that actually brings it round to back to a prayer to God to restore the forces of his people, right? A post-exilic prayer. And waiting for deliverance. That deliverance for Israel would come from Zion, that God would show up and rescue his people.
It's
Definitively.
not in SRV, it makes reference to this Mahala, who was a wife of Esau, and I might pronounce names of. So when Esau saw the Canaanite woman did not please the father Isaac, Esau went to Ishmael and took this, I can't pronounce the name, the daughter, the one he's doing, of Abraham's son Ishmael and sister of, I can't pronounce the name of it, to be his wife in addition to wife. And when I read that, I said, oh, he was writing it to say, well, this bad things are going to happen to people like Esau who violate the covenants because they weren't supposed to take Canaanite women. Or is that not right?
Well, they weren't. That's correct. I mean, that was contrary. And I don't have any note like that.
Well, I didn't understand what it meant, so that's why I Googled it.
Oh, Allah.
So I don't know if that's true, but I said, well, somebody thought they were referencing, I guess. I don't know if they did or not, but that's what it was.
Right.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
So when
Okay. Well, so for next week. Well, yeah. I'm sorry, Erica.
You seem to have a delay. Sorry about that. So when they wrote this, does this, the way people were understanding it, did this also lead to the confusion of what their expectations were when the Messiah was going to come? Because it's taught, they're thinking they're going to get earthly restoration of their fortunes once they're released from foreign oppression.
Right. So that restoring the fortunes of his people involves scattering the bones of the ungodly and rejecting kind of the pagan oppressor. And so this is down the line of that darker side of the Israelite spirituality and expectation in post-exilic Israel. And so that a Messiah that comes along and says, oh, God has sent his deliverance. And as someone who says the Gentile, that's not necessarily, again, that's not a welcome message, as Jesus found out in Luke chapter 4 in Nazareth. So anyway, so that's kind of, it's a testimony to that darker, edgier side, to the Israelite spirituality. So for next week, we'll have Psalms 55 and 56. 55 and 56. All right, because Psalm 54 appears on Sunday mornings. So, all right. Well, very good. Well, it's 6 o'clock sharp, so I'll let you go off to your dinners. And good to see you all, and happy Pentecost. And we'll see you for Trinity Sunday next week. Take care now.